Hi, y'all. Thank you for being here. We're going to get started. We were having a little bit of technical difficulties, but hopefully folks can hear us. If someone can holler in the chat for us that you hear us just fine. Okay, great. I see it now. Perfect. I just wanted to make sure. All right, and then all of our lovely panelists, y'all are welcome to come off video or off mute, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Steph, I think our videos are being controlled by you, if that's possible.
Okay, let me see if I can change that real quick. Thanks y'all for being super patient as we figure out our Zoom world. Okay, so I can't fix it right now. So maybe this will be just a lovely opportunity for folks to hear our voices. I will have some slides to share in a minute, so you'll have something to look at. And I'm really sorry to our panelists who probably look very cute and wanted to be able to show off on our webinar today. So I'm sorry about that. But actually, let's go ahead and get started because it's a little bit past 6, and I want to respect everyone's time. I know, I'm so sorry to the folks in the chat who are like, obviously this is why you all came to this webinar, but I appreciate y'all's patience and understanding. So, all right, welcome to our webinar on building relationships with folks on the inside. My name is Steph. I use she and her pronouns. I work for the ACLU of Alabama. I do community outreach and organizing around policing and prisons. I'm really excited to talk with y'all, learn with y'all, and especially learn from the panelists who are joining us from the Southern Center today. So I'm gonna let them introduce themselves, and I have a prompt for y'all, so if y'all bear with me. When you all share and introduce yourselves, could you all share your name, your pronouns, and also could you just think about and share out the last time you either wrote or the last time you received a handwritten letter and what that made you feel. So share when you received it and then what it made you feel, either if you sent it or if you received it. All right, hopefully that was clear. And I won't pick on anyone to go first, but y'all can feel free to share when you'd like to.
Go ahead, Dylan.
Sorry about that. My name is Dylan Nettles. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the policy analyst for the ACLU of Alabama.
Oh, Dylan, you have to share out the last time you either sent or received a letter.
Oh my, the last time I sent a letter, to be honest, I don't know if email counts, but I haven't sent a handwritten letter in quite some time, but I've definitely emailed with people on the inside rather recently.
Thank you, Dylan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Forte. She, her pronouns. I'm the senior investigator in the Capital Litigation Unit at the Southern Center for Human Rights. And I'm actually very old school and I'll do a lot of handwritten correspondence because I love it, especially in the recent quarantine months. I sent a lot of postcards and letters to friends. So I just received a postcard in the mail last week and it made me very happy.
Thank you, Sarah.
And I'll go ahead and piggyback off Sarah. Hey everyone, my name is Allie Gannum, and I'm a staff attorney in the Impact Litigation Unit at the Southern Center for Human Rights. The last time I received a handwritten letter was maybe 2 or 3 hours ago. I receive handwritten letters most days from clients. And the last time I wrote a handwritten letter, I'm trying to dig through my memory, but I actually think it may have been to an incarcerated person, to a pen pal that I have from a former clinic that I was in law school. So I think that was the last handwritten letter I wrote, though occasionally I will write handwritten letters to friends like Sarah.
Thanks, Allie.
Hey y'all, my name is Bex Collins. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a law student at North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. And the last letter I received was yesterday from a friend of mine named Jeremy in Texas. And they are going through it. They're on lockdown because Texas is not responding well to COVID, and they are trans. And so their letter was very sad. So it didn't feel great, but I'm glad to have received it.
Thank you for sharing that, Bex. All right, so today on our webinar, we're gonna go over a couple of things. So the first part, Dylan and I are gonna tag team to share some like quick facts about incarceration, particularly in Alabama. During the rest of the year, usually during legislative session, Dylan and I spend a lot of time going across the state and teaching folks and sharing about the history of Alabama prisons, and particularly in this political moment, what ways people who want to get involved in organizing around the conditions in Alabama prisons, we usually do this work. So we're pulling some of these facts from that larger presentation, but if you ever want to learn more about that, we have those slides and those stats and those that data that we can share out in an email later on. All right, so after the fast facts, we're gonna move into more of like the letter writing, what's the history of it in terms of a prisoner solidarity practice. And then the last piece, we'll have a conversation with all our panelists and the work that they do and how they're building relationships with people on the inside. So those are the three parts that you can hear today, we'll do today. And then folks are asking about the slides in the chat, but I haven't actually shared them yet. I was just trying to give you a little overview of what we're doing today. Okay, so we're gonna move into these facts. So let me share my screen with you. Cool. All right, so you should be able to see my the slides now. Yeah, it seems like folks can. If you end up having a question along the way, you're welcome, of course, to throw it in the chat and one of us might see it, but you're also welcome to put it in the Q&A section that's at the in the panel bar, and then we'll try to get to it at the very end when we have some Q&A time. Okay, cool. So let's do this. All right, so we're gonna share these incarceration by the numbers just to get folks thinking about what this looks like, particularly in Alabama. And I'll have Dylan kick us off.
$10 million people in the US have an immediate family member in jail or prison.
In this particular number, we get this data from our colleagues at the Equal Justice Initiative. So if you're looking for specifics around conditions in Alabama prisons, they're a really good resource. They're getting quite popular, and you'll probably see them, like you've probably seen their name across the country and the state. But if you go to their actual website, they have really good resources that you can pull this type of information from. All right, so 21,000 people are currently incarcerated in Alabama prisons. So this is maybe a little bit more of a rough number. It's a little bit higher than this, but approximately. All right, Dylan.
1,500 people who have life without, 1,500 people have life without parole sentences in Alabama.
And Dylan, not to put you on the spot by any means, but can you explain the distinction with life without and life sentences real quick before I read this next stat?
Sure, I'll just give a really brief explanation. Pretty much, if you have life without parole, that means that you have been already determined that you will not be eligible for a parole hearing before the Alabama Bureau of Pardons and Paroles. However, if you were sentenced to a life with, then you at some point could have your hearing in front of the parole board, which is a subject that I'm sure will also unpack a bit more, perhaps in this presentation or also in some of our future Smart Justice summer school sessions.
Thank you.
It's a very big topic in Alabama.
Totally. Thank you so much. All right. So this number, 1 in 4 people who are currently serving life sentences in Alabama. So Dylan just described the difference between someone who is serving life without and people who are serving life sentences with the opportunity for parole. So we currently have 1 in 4 people who are currently incarcerated who are serving some form of a life sentence.
16 people have died from COVID-19 in an Alabama prison.
So once again, this data is being tracked by a couple of organizations within the state of Alabama, including a coalition called the Alabamians for Fair Justice. This has also been a piece of the work that we do at the ACLU of Alabama, where we have consistently tried to bring this issue of COVID in jails and prisons across the state up to the people who have the power to make decisions around release, because people are currently dying. I mean, prisons and jails are always horrible places, but particularly during a global pandemic. And Dylan, again, not trying to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you had anything to add on that piece with your work.
No, not much. I mean, I just say that, I mean, the ACLU, like so many others, including I know the Southern Center as well, have been saying that this would happen since the outbreak even began for those of us who are not incarcerated. I mean, the conditions of any prison or any jail are such that, of course, there's no potential for real social distancing. And we also know that for quite some time, people who are incarcerated were not even being provided with the most minimal PPE to keep them safe. And so it's really unfortunate. This was all rather preventable. And when people ask, you know, why we have been calling for people to be released, this is exactly why, this number.
Absolutely. And someone in the chat shared a resource called Mourning Our Losses. I haven't actually been to that page, but they named in the chat that it will help us name and memorialize folks who we've lost. And I'm assuming that it's specific to the pandemic, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, cool. All right, so this next number, I actually talked to a colleague who explained this to me, from my understanding, the number 23 is the number of hours that people in solitary confinement spend in their cell. And this number actually comes from the fact that, like, technically people are supposed to get 1 hour of time not in solitary, but in practice, this number really is more like 24. So people are spending full time. Not that an hour, is even much in the first place, but the reality is that in practice, it's really looking like people are constantly in solitary, particularly in Alabama because of our prison conditions and the fact that we have, quote, understaffing.
And I take it that this is an average number, Steph, as well, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the temperature in an Alabama solitary cell is 100 degrees.
Absolutely. So yes, of course, we don't have, thermometers in every single facility, but on average, the temperatures in Alabama prisons, because of the conditions that they're in, and because prisons don't have AC, folks who are in solitary are having to sit. So we just looked at the number 23, having to sit in these kinds of temperatures for these extended periods of time. All right, so this last, I believe this is our last number to share. It might not be actually, but so it's been 5 months since in-person visits, and we all know are experiencing to some degree what it's like to not be around our people as a protective measure to the COVID-19 pandemic. And for folks who are incarcerated, who are really depending on their only interactions with the outside world coming from in-person visits. It's now been 5 months since people have seen their people. And this number, I realize that like this is also a safety precaution, but there also is no plan and there is no necessarily end in sight for folks who are currently on the inside. So it's like important to hold that, I think, for me. Okay. I wanted to just give us a second because I know we just threw a lot of numbers at you, and something Dylan and I try to practice is that when we are talking about these really big ideas and really hard concepts or things that are really horrible in this world, that we don't just expect people to take it and move through it. So I do want to make sure that folks, if you have a question, you're able to share, or we can just hold on to this for a second. But I'll give y'all a minute. Okay, so we're gonna move into our work specifically today about the letter writing. As I mentioned before, this is a major practice of prisoner solidarity work. And one of our panelists from the Southern Center is going to be speaking to us a little bit about their own relationship building that they've done. And then we're also going to listen to a story from someone in Alabama who has built a relationship with someone while they were incarcerated. So let's get started. All right, so the practice of letter writing, there's a few reasons, obviously, why it's really, really important work. One of the values that we really hold closely is this concept of rejecting disposability. So, and folks are welcome to like share in the chat if they have their own concepts of what it means to be disposable, of course. But so the idea of disposability is that like you do something wrong, it means that you're a bad person, and then therefore you are incarcerated and you no longer mean anything to this world, and you are disposable, right? I feel like that's a pretty simplification of that term or that concept. But what this type of relationship building through letter writing requires us to do is to reject that, to say like, this is not something that I subscribe to, and that all people make mistakes, do horrible things, and or are fuller people than just, and I really always feel kind of silly quoting Brian Stevenson, but we are all more than the worst thing we've ever done, right? And so this idea of rejecting disposability really comes through for that. And I don't want to put any of our panelists on the spot, but if you all want to like jump in real quick on anything you'd like to add to this like concept of rejecting disposability.
Steph, I was just gonna offer just from my perspective with being involved, particularly from the legislative end and speaking with a lot of elected officials on a routine basis. Oftentimes when these policies come before the legislature, these bills to oftentimes enhance criminal penalties. So that means to make the penalty as a result of their conviction tougher, meaning longer sentences, those type of things. Oftentimes, I think that it's soon that, and I was actually having a conversation with some folks about this earlier, as soon as a charge is even made and that charge is associated with a person who is oftentimes when they're associated with a person who is Black, a person who is coming from poverty, they oftentimes immediately assume that that person is, whatever has happened or hasn't happened, that person deserves this punishment. And so to lock them away, to sever the relationships that they may have with their families, with their communities, to take away their jobs, and the potential to provide for their communities is all worth it, because that person now has done something that deems them as disposable, as not being worthwhile of the potential to correct or make right what maybe they did do wrong, or maybe they didn't, as we often also know is the case. And so I think that just kind of provides some perspective on how these things are, how that disposability really affects the minds of those who are actually making the policies that ultimately lead to these very lengthy sentences and things like even life without parole that we mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. Wow, you really set this up for us. I don't think you did that on purpose, but thank you. We're actually going to watch the story of Ian and Debbie. So I'm going to play a short video for y'all. And we're going to talk a little bit about how the relationship itself is an act of rejecting disposability. And then we'll come back to it. I should just play it for y'all. So give me 1 second. Okay, so when I press play, if y'all can do me the solid favor in the chat of just letting me know that you do hear it, please. That's always my biggest worry. And folks do see the screen, right? The video. Cool. Sounds good.
I had built up a reputation in the neighborhood as someone who was fearless. It didn't matter that I was the youngest. I was given a gun.
My daughters were 3 and 1, and it was the first time I had been out really since I had my second baby. I see these 3 guys walk up to the car, and I wasn't really paying attention to them. One of them asked, "You got any change?" I heard from behind, "I'm serious, give it up."
And Debbie immediately screamed. I immediately fired.
He shot. I saw one of my teeth fall on the ground.
I threw the gun in some bushes and went back to the neighborhood.
My front tooth was gone. All the teeth on the bottom left side, all of them were gone. Then I found out who it was. They said Ian Manuel 13. I'm like, 13? There's no way a 13-year-old kid shot me. He's just a child.
My lawyer at the time, he goes and gets my mom, talks to my mom for about 15 minutes. My mom's older than me. My mom has been in prison before. She's dealt with the criminal justice system before. And she tells me, "Ian, do what your lawyers say, baby. Do it for me. Please plead guilty for me." I said, "Okay, Mom." She went to her grave regretting that, man. Because I ended up being sentenced to life. I've been in prison about a year at this time. It was around December 1991. I had all my paperwork scattered out on the table. Police report was in there with Debbie's phone number. So I got the idea, let me call Debbie.
I got a phone call, and it was a collect call.
You have a collect call from Ian at Appalachian Correctional Institution. You accept the charges.
Morbid curiosity, more than anything. I said, I'll accept the charges.
The first thing I say was, "Ms. Bakery, I called to wish you and your family a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and to apologize, for shooting you in the face."
He said he was sorry for what he did, and if it wouldn't be too much trouble, I would like to write you.
She said yes. And that's how our correspondence started.
I was getting letters from him from the time he was 14, and I'm reading them, and I'm thinking, the way his sentence structure his vocabulary. He is way too young to be disarticulate.
I'm glad I had followed my heart and picked up that phone that day, because if not, I would have missed out on a truly special friendship.
I forgave him because he was a child. I used this to make my life better. I refocused.
Ian had been sentenced to life without parole for a crime at the age of 13. I wrote him a letter. We're thinking about challenging the constitutionality of life without parole sentences for children. We started taking cases to the US Supreme Court. When the court ruled that it is unconstitutional to impose these kinds of sentences on children convicted of non-homicides, we went back to the court where Ian's case was pending. We said, you have to give him relief. And Debbie came to court and she said these amazing things about how she doesn't believe that the sentence that Ian received was fair or just, and she supports him being released from jail or prison.
Ian got up and made such a beautiful speech to the judge.
I told the judge, me and Debbie have been waiting for years for the judicial system to catch up to my remorse and her forgiveness. I was released that night.
It's really hard to step out into the world, particularly now when you're coming out as an adult, but you left the world as a child. You look like an adult, but you have none of the life experiences that adults are supposed to have. Ian had never lived alone before. He's never rented anything. He's never had a bank account. He's never learned to drive. He doesn't know any of the things that people assume he knows.
You said, put your foot on the brake and then press this.
But having some outside people who are cheering for him, rooting for him, it's obviously made a huge impact.
Just press that, I guess.
And nobody has played that role more enthusiastically, more lovingly, and with more commitment than Debbie.
I see Ian for who he is. He still has a lot of growing to do, and I don't glorify him, but our relationship, it spans so many years from childhood to adulthood that he's almost like my child. You can just put it in like a pan and stir fry it.
You don't overcome fear and anger without courage. You don't affirm the other things people are when they make mistakes or when terrible things happen to them without courage.
I'm not saying he wasn't responsible for his actions, but when you're 13, you should be given the opportunity to change, to grow. What I feel is compassion for another human being.
Thank you all for watching that. So I think Ian and Debbie's relationship demonstrates this one value that we talked about with rejecting disposability. Something that I also want to name that I think it's important is that it's complex and that it's definitely imperfect. There's no roadmap for what it looks like to build relationships with people who are incarcerated or with people who may have caused harm, and how do you repair that harm? Because unfortunately, we send people to prison and that doesn't really repair any harm at all. And so people don't necessarily have a roadmap or the tools to do that. So I just think it is important to name the complexity of what they are doing. But I also think it's really beautiful, and it allows for everyone to have their fuller humanity when you reject this idea that we're disposable when we make mistakes. All right, so we're gonna move on and talk about this other piece, which is ending isolation, which folds right into rejecting disposability. So this is another big value or principle, if you'd like to think about it that way. But people who are incarcerated are, like we described with the situation in COVID, where people have not seen their loved ones for 5 months and there's really no end in sight. This is a an experience of isolation that our bodies as humans are not prepared or designed to experience. And so our values of writing is to disrupt that, to end the isolation. Also, like into that, when we reject disposability and when we end that isolation, we are building power, right? We are showing the state that like we can build power outside of this. We don't have to rely on everything the state has taught us about people who are incarcerated. And I'm gonna actually hand it over to Bex, one of our folks at the Southern Center, to talk a little bit about how they've done exactly that with their prisoner solidarity practice. So it's now onward to you, Bex.
Thanks, Steph. I also want to say that I'm a summer intern at the Southern Center. So I want to make sure that I'm not, you know, not an employee, not representing the Southern Center's politics or views on stuff. Yeah, and there's a picture of me. It's from years ago, but it's as if I were on camera right now. So I just wanted to share a little bit about, you know, sort of how I got into this work when I was talking with Steph prior to this conversation. That was part of like something that she asked me to share. And so I was living in DC about 10 or so years ago and started working with some other trans people on this project called the DMV Trans Circulator. And basically it operated as a newsletter, and we worked with trans people outside of prison and trans folks inside prison in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia prisons and in those areas. Basically we use this newsletter to disseminate information, to support folks in accessing gender affirming care, and other like hormones and other sort of things that oftentimes trans people in prison want and need access to. And then we shared stories and shared what was going on in the world. And through that, I think that's like where I first started to like build relationships with folks. And that particularly blossomed like when people were released from prison, and I was able to continue building those relationships. And then at the same time that was happening, there were some hunger strikes going on in Virginia at the Supermax prisons. There are several notoriously bad Supermax prisons in Virginia, and folks who were incarcerated had organized these like really incredible hunger strikes with a list of demands. And I had some friends of friends who were incarcerated in those prisons and who were actively participating in the hunger strikes. And so I started to build relationships with those folks and still correspond with some of them now. And so I think those two like big experiences that happened to me around the same time and like happened around the time that I was being politicized around like prisons and abolition more generally, showed me just like the importance of building relationships and showing up for people and just like being a person who like really just like showed up. And so I started to write to people. There's an organization called Black and Pink, which I'm pretty sure Steph will be at the end of this slide, I think. But I started to write to people. There's like a pretty massive, complete pen pal list that they have. And so I just started to write to folks through that. And this photo is me and my pal, James. And we've been writing for about 9 years. He likes to call himself the Jolly Green Giant because he's much larger than I am. And it's like been a really beautiful and sweet and just like a really wonderful friendship that we've created. And I think the big thing that I think I have taken away from like the relationships one of the big things I've taken away from the relationships that I've built with folks is just like how powerful it is to like be able to write to folks, to be able to show up for people, to be like, I'm here, I care about you, and I'm like, I'm making sure you're all right and doing what I can, and I think that's something that feels like very just like really beautiful and kind of like a F you to the to the state and to to prisons, which like try to isolate people, try to dispose of people and throw them away from community. And so that's something that's been really sweet for me. And then I think the other thing I wanted to just mention as far as like this building power part is, you know, I'm only recently in law school, and it's like I've been like really trying to not be a lawyer. Sorry, y'all. But I think one of the things that has felt really powerful and great about the relationships I built is like being able to advocate for folks and being able to just like, I think so often prisons are intentionally trying to dispose and isolate people, that like when there are folks on the outside calling the warden and calling officers in the prison just to be like, hey, like I'm checking up on this person, that just like shows that they're not alone. And I think like, again, prior to me going to law school and having any sort of like legalese understanding, I think I was able to like help a lot of folks get some of their needs met that weren't being met before. This is a little tattoo that James and I have. It's matching, and I like to say that it's one of the gayest things about me, which, you know, is a question, perhaps.
Thank you, Beth, for sharing about those pieces. It's really important. I think the last thing you noted, that it did not require law school, right, for you to build this kind of relationship with someone who is currently incarcerated. And thanks for sharing this picture of your, yes, very gay, beautiful tattoos with your pen pal, James. All right, so we're gonna move into a bit of a discussion with Sarah, Allie, Bex, and Dylan. They're folks who do like the legal work and also the policy advocacy work. And so it's a different perspective on the types of relationships that they're building. So we talked a little bit about lay people like myself who write to folks and build relationships outside of being a legal advocate or a policy advocate. And so I'm gonna ask them a couple of questions and have them share out with y'all. Okay, so all my panelists are here. So my first question for folks, and any of y'all who want to share, when you speak again, if you can just say your name, so folks are following who's speaking. But like I had mentioned before, y'all are doing this legal and policy work, and so I want to know like how it is that you are prioritizing, or like what it looks like to build relationships with people who are currently incarcerated for you in your work, and then how does that go then and inform what you are doing, whether it's policy or like whatever it is in the legal world, because there's so many aspects of it. But can you speak to like how you're building those relationships and then how they are informing your work? And whoever wants to jump in, please do.
I'm happy to start. This is Allie from the Southern Center for Human Rights. And I mean, Steph, I think probably the first thing I would say is that like there is no work that we do at the Southern Center without this relationship building. And I think it's critical in everything that we do. And I'll let Sarah speak to the way that this plays out in the capital litigation unit at the Southern Center. But I work in our impact litigation unit, which does both class action work and individual advocacy work. And so I can speak a little bit to what relationship building has looked like, at least for me in this space. So in our individual advocacy cases at the Southern Center, oftentimes what we're trying to do is work to get people resentenced or released through the parole board who are sentenced to incredibly long terms of confinement. So as Steph mentioned, life without parole sentences, life sentences, or de facto life sentences, where someone is sentenced to 80 years or 90 years or something that, while the court wouldn't call it a life sentence, of course is. And then now during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been doing some work trying to get folks released who are particularly vulnerable to infection or death from the virus because of their advanced age or their underlying medical conditions. And I think a lot of times in those kinds of cases, in resentencing cases or COVID release type cases, the information that we're focused on gathering and highlighting, either to approach a district attorney or to approach the parole board, is the kind of information that you can't get just from looking at documents about the case or about the underlying conviction. But it's information that you have to build relationships with your clients to convey, things like what they're most proud of having accomplished while incarcerated for the last X number of years, or what relationships they've built with their loved ones on the outside or with people on the inside, what their hopes are for the future, what their plans are for after their release. And you just can't do any of that, and you can't communicate, your client's story to decision makers who are innately hostile to your clients and specifically hostile to their humanity and their dignity without kind of establishing that foundation of trust, which I think often takes time and requires many conversations and many written exchanges over the course of months or even years in some cases. And then I guess the other thing that I would just quickly say about this is that I think the place where a lot of lawyers fail to do this, I think most good lawyers are like semi-decent at this in the individual advocacy space, not all by any means, but I think where a lot of lawyers really struggle to do this and fail to do this well is in the context of class actions and impact litigation. I think it's very common for impact litigation attorneys to be so focused on building like a prestigious case or building a case really fast, or in some cases, particularly when large law firms get involved, just building a case to satisfy their pro bono hours. I think it's very common for the claims in those cases and the demands that the lawyers are making in those cases to be completely disconnected from what incarcerated people actually want or say that they need. And just as a for instance, in this moment, there are a lot of organizations and a lot of law firms that are clamoring to do class action litigation around the pandemic. And I don't want to, I don't mean to suggest that that's not important. It is certainly a necessity in many places and in many correctional systems. But there are a lot of prisons where there are other major problems and other huge concerns that predated COVID-19. And Steph and Dylan drew folks' attention to a lot of those problems. The use of solitary confinement, which the UN has described as torture, particularly as applied to people with mental illnesses. Incredibly high rates of suicides and homicides in our prisons. Lack of access to the grievance process or to communication tools to contact friends and families. A lot of those things intersect with and exacerbate the conditions that are created by the pandemic. But if law firms or legal organizations aren't talking to incarcerated people, they wouldn't know that. And they wouldn't know that many people are just as concerned about these other things. And so all of this is to say that I think it's really important for this kind of litigation to be tied to the experiences, the lived experiences of incarcerated people. And I think it's something that, we try at the Southern Center to do, to ensure that our lawsuits are very rigorously investigated, which means every day, every week, every month, talking to folks on the inside, maintaining relationships with them, and doing our best to litigate the issues that are of concern to the human beings that they impact.
Thank you, Ali. And Sarah, please feel free to add to that piece around like how it's informing y'all's work. I also, if you can, if anyone wants to answer to an extension of that question, but you spoke to like, if folks are trying to do impact litigation, then they can't really do that without having talked to and having built really authentic and earnest relationships with people who are incarcerated. And I want to add the policy piece to that. So often you'll hear the jargon of like, we must center directly impacted people. You'll hear policymakers say that. And so if anyone wants to speak to that piece too, of like, what does that mean and how can they do it when they say that they're gonna, quote, center directly impacted people in this work.
Sarah, did you want to say something before I kind of jump in on this?
Sure. Yes, and I tried to jump in earlier, but as usual, I was on mute. Um, so I just wanted to expand a little more on what Allie was saying. At the Southern Center, I work in our capital litigation unit, primarily working with folks who have already been convicted and sentenced to death. So working on their appeals, and a large part of the investigation is mitigation. So learning about our clients' life history, and it's absolutely crucial to develop a good relationship with our clients in order to learn about their life. And I spend, what's one of my favorite parts of my job. I've been doing this for 14 years, and I love my relationships with my clients, and I really I know this is so painful for them to be sort of even more cut off from their communities and their families because of the lack of visitation due to the pandemic. So I have personally tried to increase my own correspondence, but I've always written, called, and visited as often as I can, just to make sure that relationship is strong. And I think another sort of aspect of holistic or client-centered representation is to make sure you have that relationship so you can have a really good understanding of what your clients' needs are and what their goals are, because a legal victory to lawyers might not look the same as what a victory might mean to the client you're working with. So having really good communication and correspondence that emphasizes more collaboration and sometimes a compromise, working together on the same team for whatever is in the best interest of the client.
Yeah, I definitely have to say I can't wait to have the number of years of experience that Sarah has, because the truth is that all of this and just learning how to keep these voices, both people who are directly impacted, and who could be formerly incarcerated, or those who are on the inside, is definitely something I've been challenged by, and just making sure that authentically we're bringing those voices into shaping our work. And just so people understand, at the ACLU of Alabama, the vehicle through which we move our work around the criminal punishment system and prisons is through what we call the Campaign for Smart Justice. That's why we're at Smart Justice Summer School. And for us, I think we've certainly taken the responsibility to involve directly impacted people in this work very seriously. That's looked like things like coalition building and creating legislative priorities that ultimately we then, lobby elected officials with, building a dynamic fellowship opportunity which Steph stewards and provides impacted individuals with skills and training, and really to layer and build on top of what they're already doing in their communities. And then I can't leave out my colleague Beth Shelburne, who is an investigative reporter who just has done phenomenal work around reporting around the conditions in which people on the inside are experiencing, which she's hearing directly from them, and talking about the stories and experiences of how it's affecting their families. But all that being said, I think I have to just be honest that also that hasn't always entailed, or I don't think we've reached a point where we're at the point I would like us to be at in terms of involving the people on the inside and shaping our work and our output. And so I think that we still have to challenge ourselves to integrate them into actually defining our goals and measuring what our success looks like, and determining especially how our policy and legal priorities actually translate into meeting the material needs of people on the inside. Because frankly, as I have been spending more time talking to folks on the inside, that's something I hear, is that we can be out here pushing all day for these really big kind of like moments around these policy solutions. However, or even these huge cases, however, that doesn't always translate back into actually changing the conditions or what they feel like they're experiencing on the day-to-day. And so that's something that, to be honest, I'm working through in my own work and constantly trying to interrogate as I'm kind of pushing forward what we're doing.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate both of those pieces that y'all described. And for folks who are not in the legal and policy world, I'm wondering if you all could maybe share, like, if you all have perspective on what we could be doing as folks who are not maybe doing this as a profession, like what is the significance or power of our letter writing, of our prisoner solidarity practice as it informs like legal and policy worlds. If I know that might be like, it might not be like a perfect connection, but I am curious if y'all feel like our role as people who like aren't doing this work in the formal way y'all are, like what value does our practice bring to y'all's work?
Hey, this is Sarah again. I think it, it partially goes to what you were saying at the beginning about this idea of rejecting disposability. I have had so many clients on death row over the years who treasure and value relationships that they have with pen pals. Clients who don't really have a lot of family support, but I was telling Allie earlier, I have a client who's been writing to the same woman in England for, I think, almost 30 years now. And it's just a really important connection to the outside world. And it's just, it's just really important to them. So I think it's definitely worth the time and effort.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't want to cut anyone else off if they were going to add.
I was just going to quickly say, Steph, this is Allie, that I think it's the other reason this kind of relationship building and letter writing is so important is because the state, the Department of Corrections specifically in Alabama, makes it their daily practice to dehumanize people and to demean people and to try to reinforce a narrative of disposability. They refer to them in all interactions and conversations as inmates or prisoners and not as people. They do it to the clients themselves and to their advocates. In every piece of writing, people will be referred to as inmates or prisoners. And I just think it's important for all of us to be pushing back against that narrative. Not just those of us who are in formal, legal or paralegal roles, but for everyone to sort of be countering these really pernicious narratives that incarcerated people are less than human, which the state just reinforces in the language they use every day.
Absolutely. I'm going to share this one screen really quickly. Let me see if it lets me do it. Okay, sorry, maybe it will let me, but I have a resource guide for y'all that y'all are gonna receive in your email. And this particular resource that we put together at ACLU of Alabama is on the sort of like the nitty gritty of writing to folks. So some of the questions that might come up for people who want to do this kind of work around, like, how do you address a letter? Like, how do I even start? How do I even get a pen pal? Those pieces are in this letter writing guide. And so I just want to say that before I maybe just open up for a couple of minutes of questions, but you'll get that letter writing guide. And then the next piece is there are going to be a couple of organizations that I will point you to. One is which is Black and Pink. That's the organization that Bex talked about earlier that they found a pen pal with. And then another one is Survived and Punished. And so that particular organization connects people to folks who are survivors who are incarcerated. So specifically writing to people who are survivors of sexual abuse and assault and those kinds of violence. And so those two organizations, Black and Pink as a queer org and Survived and Punished as an org who serve survivors are connecting you with people who are particularly vulnerable inside of the U.S. prison system. And so I would encourage y'all to find a pen pal through there. But my last question for y'all as a panel and people who do this really important work is if y'all have like a final recommendation or like a call to action for people to do this type of really critical work. Like what would you share with folks who maybe like are on the fence about doing this?
I would just say, do the tough work of trying to understand their experiences, but don't just say, okay, I get it. Actually also then interrogate your own beliefs, the ways in which you react to what I think we most kind of traditionally throw all in a bucket of what's called harm. But think about the ways in which you can actually respond differently. As Allie just spoke to this so beautifully, but right, like one of the ways that the system or system actors constantly signal to the public and give reminders of like that these folks are disposable, that they are not deserving of humanity is by constantly reminding us of all the wrong things that they've done. But I think one of the questions I often try to also ask myself is, how did we fail them? And I don't think that you ever will find that those people are asking themselves that question very much, but how did we fail them? Because I feel that we all have a responsibility to our communities to show up for people, to make sure that our neighbors and the folks around us are taken care of. And the truth is that oftentimes these folks who have been locked away, who've been disposed of, have been failed. And this isn't to say that everyone who's on the inside is a monolith, but I do have to ask, how did we allow them to be raised in communities where they themselves and their families didn't have what they needed, where they saw inequitable distribution of resources and wealth, where they didn't have the textbooks that should have been in their schools or the mental health supports that they should have had as adults. And so those are the type of things that I often find myself asking myself and the people around me, and I would encourage you all to do the same.
Thank you, Dylan. Any of our other panelists, if they want to share?
This is Allie from the Southern Center, and I think Dylan said it way better than I ever could, but just as sort of a corollary to what he said, I think like a necessary accompaniment to doing the work of writing to folks inside and building relationships with folks inside is also pushing more broadly for a world without prisons, so that human beings don't have to be separated from their loved ones and confined in cages and forced to endure unspeakable trauma at the hands of the state. So I think, while we should be doing this work of building relationships and ensuring that folks on the inside have access not just to basic necessities, but to the things that they need to thrive, like books and programs and meaningful correspondence and meaningful contact with their loved ones. I think we also need to be working towards, a world where these systems don't exist. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. I would pause this right there, but Sarah, Bex, anything else?
Yeah, I was just to add and maybe make it just to add on Allie. I think for me, I've been sitting in like a place of, okay, I want to be like building, I want to be dreaming and like creating the world that I want to be in. And so the world I want to be in, kind of what Ali is saying, it's not one with prisons. It's not one where people are caged and locked away from their people. And so part of that is like, is writing to people, is showing up for people, is like taking the time that I can to show up in the best way that's possible. And so I think like, I think just trying to hold that as something as you move forward. And like, I'm like, I've built like really beautiful, like lifelong relationships, and that feels really special. And none of us don't need more friends.
That's a really good point. I can't necessarily see the chat in this moment, so I'm really sorry. I don't know that we'll have time right now for Q&A, but I promise you that when I send this email with all of the resources that we talked about today, if you email me back with a question, I will make sure that it gets answered. And I just want to give a final word maybe to Sarah if she has anything to add.
No, I think everyone pretty much covered what I would say. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and for everyone for joining us today.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you. I know we didn't have the most amount of time and we could talk about this a lot and grow in this politic, for hours. But thank you all for being here. I will send you all of the resources tomorrow and feel free to holler with any questions. And thank you again for Southern Center folks for doing this with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steph and Dylan.
Bye, y'all.